but Russians are not making any breakthrough on land. They are taking one or two villages. That is not going to make a strategic difference in the war. Ukraine, before Russian invasion, was the largest country in Europe. It's impossible. It's still very far away from Kiev.
Hello and welcome to Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. Now, with reports of the Russian summer offensive stalling, and then we've got the fallout, or is it the way forward from the NATO summit last week? But we're seeing ever larger drone and missile attacks against civilian targets in Ukraine. We're lucky today to be talking to Orysia Lutsevych. Now, Orysia is the Deputy Director of Russia and Eurasia, of the Russia and Eurasia Programme, and the head of the Ukraine Forum at Chatham House. Welcome back to Times Radio.
Thank you. Good to be back with you, Philip.
Good to have you on. Now, this week, the Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief, Syrsky, stated on Thursday that Ukrainian forces have halted Russia's recent advance in the northern Sumy region and have stabilized the front line. However, Associated Press are also reporting that Russian forces have been slowly grinding forward, as they have been for some months, along the, I think it's 1,000 kilometre, that's 620 miles for those who don't do kilometres, front line. How do you reconcile the differences between Syrsky saying it's stopped and AP reporting it's still going on? And what's your thoughts on the true state of the front line at the moment in eastern Ukraine?
So I think the way to see it is that it's not a stalemate. Like a lot of people are thinking that this war is a stalemate. It's very dynamic front line, like you've described, very long one, where there's a lot of movements all along the front line. What Russians are doing, they're poking for Ukrainian weaknesses, because as we know, being such a long front line, it's not easy for Ukraine to man in equal intensity all the defense lines, to position these defense lines, including the to man engineering defense structures that they have built to hold on Russian offensive. So we are seeing a lot of attacks. I mean, on average, there are more than 100 every day or between the two armies along this front line, and Russians keep pushing and pushing. What is making it difficult for both sides to achieve an advantage is what the military experts now calling the kill zones, the areas of almost complete visibility and control by the drones, where infantry, armored vehicles, and other equipment cannot really move, and the sides are taking heavy casualties. So that slows down Russian advance, helps Ukraine with the defense, but in the end, Russians keep trying. Putin is fed probably unrealistic information about the successes he's making, and that's why there was the statement of NATO Secretary General saying it will be a hot summer for Ukraine, because Russia is not getting, Russian top leadership is not getting the correct information. And Ukrainians are bravely defending, holding off its territory against Russian summer offensive.
Are you hearing any talk of a Ukrainian summer offensive? Or do you think Ukraine is going to sit and just defend on the front line, and actually its offensive is the attacks it's putting into occupied territories, Crimea, but also into Russia and against the Russian defense industrial base?
I think this war is breaking all the rules and understanding of the war, what we are watching for, and how wars evolving. When you think about the most recent Spiderweb operation, where Ukraine launched its drones deep down into Russian territory to damage strategic fighter jets, that is Ukrainian style offensive. Because Ukraine is here to defend its territory, and its offensive is at this point, given the resources which are more technological rather than manpower, is to actually try to destroy Russian military capabilities deep inside Russia, not by infantry or missiles, by using drone technology.
Yes, it's interesting. That's what we describe in military terms as the deep battle at the operational level. whereas the deep battle at the tactical level was carried out by artillery and rockets. And now that has been, as you quite clearly articulated, made different with the use of drones and everything else on the front line. But we're seeing the Russian responses now being massive attacks using drones and ballistic missiles against Ukrainian defense industrial targets, but they're also deliberately targeting civilian targets. And the other night, there was, I think, 537 drones and rockets fired at Ukraine. Uh, do you think this is Putin recognizing that there is a sea change in European politics and the US Russian US EU relationship after the NATO summit? And he's trying to just lash out because of that using all of the weapons that he's got. And is this something, do you think, is going to become the norm over coming days, weeks, and months?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some things that didn't change much. We are looking for these signs of change, but Putin has always carried attacks against Ukrainian cities. He has done it since this war started. What has changed is the scale, the number of air targets that he is launching, the way the trajectory of these drones are programmed, the size of an explosive that is attached to the drone. But they've always understood that in order to break the will of Ukrainians' resistance, they need to target civilian population. So you can describe this war as a total war. We started talking with you about the front line, but Russians are not making any breakthrough on land. They are taking one or two villages. That is not going to make a strategic difference in the war. Ukraine, before Russian invasion, was the largest country in Europe. It's impossible. It's still very far away from Kiev, and we do know that Putin's strategic objective is Ukraine. He wants to either destroy Ukrainian sovereignty completely or to put a puppet regime that would, where Ukraine de facto exists, but in reality, it's not an independent state, and that is why he is bombing cities, because he wants Ukrainian mothers to take their children and run away with them into Europe for the new school year. He wants education to make unsustainable. He wants to destroy Ukrainian economy. If people are not being paid, there are no taxation. So this is what he wants to do, and that is why he is targeting companies. He's targeting railway. He's targeting high-rise buildings. It's because he needs to go after Ukraine's morale and Ukraine's economy.
But is he actually having any success in attacking the morale of the Ukrainians? Because from an outsider looking in, I think what I see is that he seems to be focusing it, and the resolve to stand up to and fight against what Vladimir Putin is doing is getting stronger. Maybe I've got that wrong.
Well, I think there's a certain correlation between these kind of civilian bombardments and will to resist in the opposite direction as Putin hopes. And historically, this has been visible in Blitz. It has been visible in other places where the attacked population mobilizes, gets angry, starts, defending its territory, and it's not reaching the desired effect. Actually, if you look at the level of out migration from Ukraine, there's no massive wave of people queuing on the Polish-Ukrainian border. Yes, you have a couple of hundreds maybe leaving, returning. It's quite circular. So the answer to your question is no, he's not succeeding. But that does not actually prevent human life loss. And since April of this year was one of the deadliest months in the whole of war for civilians. So many died in sleep in their beds because the missile or drone exploded in the building.
Well, yes, you say this month. I'm just looking at last week. 114 missiles. I think it was 1,270 drones and nearly 1,100 glide bombs, which are dropped from Russian aircraft, and they hit Ukrainian defenses. 500-pound bombs. President Zelensky expressed immense gratitude for Western support. Now, that was after him attending the NATO conference. From a Ukrainian perspective, did the NATO conference or the NATO summit was that seen as a success And how do you think the discussion went between Vladimir Zelensky and Donald Trump this time? Did it repair what had gone wrong in the that very famous discussion in the Oval Office in the White House?
It's interesting. I think there were a lot of kind of fears about this NATO summit in Ukraine. It wasn't even sure whether Ukraine will be invited to attend. And not even possibly, people weren't even dreaming about the bilateral meeting between Zelensky and Trump. But I think it was the kind of smart diplomacy by Secretary Rutte to keep Trump reassured that it's a good moment for America, that that there is good news on defense spending, that it's something that he can claim as his victory, and in the end, he probably relaxed his position on Ukraine. And agreed to this meeting, and in general, Ukraine being a special guest as a non-NATO member at the summit. So, in Ukraine overall, this has been assessed as quite positive. One, people point to the fact that there is a specific reference of Russia as a long-term threat to NATO. And this is in line with what Ukraine, of course, experiences on the daily basis. It's a deadly threat to Ukraine. But also, it means that there is an alignment between NATO and Ukraine on that specific front line. There's also It's also very important for Ukraine whether, when you think about fortress NATO that is now trying to build, Poland is building defense lines, Estonia is training for possible, facing off Russian army, whether Ukraine is inside the fortress or Ukraine is outside the fortified walls of NATO. And I think the more time passes, the more NATO embraces that Ukraine is just one of the towers of the fortress, such an important military infrastructure, the most combat ready army, the most innovative technology that is right now developing tools to fight the war of the future. And the fact that NATO mentioned that it will, in its declaration again, account for spending of NATO member states that go for Ukraine as part of its defense spending, it means Ukraine is inside, and it means that that reassures people in Ukraine that at least European allies, if US, let's say, stops or refuses to provide military assistance, are there for Ukraine, and that they have the same threat perception, and that they want to counter this threat together with Kiev.
Yeah, well, I think everyone is recognizing that Ukraine is the forward defenses for NATO, whether it's inside or outside. It's still that forward defense and fighting the fight. But do you think NATO Secretary General Rutte was right, was clever, or was it just accidental when he referred to Donald Trump as daddy? And is Donald Trump in reality the daddy of NATO?
Well, 50% of NATO is US, right? I mean, it's not just the president himself, it's also American capabilities, it's military, it's intelligence, it's satellites, there's lots of things, right? So I think he wanted to flatter it. I mean, I don't think it was accidental. I think that in a way, this is how US is perceived in NATO. This has always been the peace dividend that was provided for Europe was by America. And this is the shock that Europe is now experiencing. My fear is that they may be waking up too late for the shock. Because if you look at the defense spending commitments, all these 5% divided into different parts, but by 2035, I mean, what kind of world we will be living in 2035? It's probably the type of aerial bombardments we are seeing now, with combined use of ballistic missiles, bombs, and drones, will become a reality. And we do not have at the moment full protection from this. Nobody has. Ukraine is now designing it as it goes, mobile groups to take down drones. Is it working? For some time it's working, but then the enemy adapts and it's not working. So I think this is where America also understands the value of Ukraine. American defense industry, the drone startups, the Pentagon Innovation Fund. Believe me, they're all there looking at the future of electronic and digital warfare. And Ukraine is already experimenting with using AI.
It's interesting. What a lot of people don't seem to realize is that all of the defense companies in the West are using Ukraine as the beta testing battleground for a lot of the new weapon systems that are coming out. In the same way that I suspect the Chinese are doing with the Russians and sending capabilities in just to test and see what they're like.
But one thing that came out of the meeting before Zelensky went to The Hague here in London, when he met Prime Minister Starmer, there was an agreement of a joint venture to produce long range drones, the British Ukrainian long range drones. And I think this is the future, in a way, of Ukraine's. Victory, because Ukraine needs a technological advantage. Right now, there is this war of attrition because neither side has it. Russia is able to generate scale. It can produce a lot of Iranian drones. It can modernize it. It has the scale. That's why the intensity of bombardment is increasing. While Ukraine has a lot of it's a real sandbox. It's a beehive of different small private drone producers that do software, the hardware, then they test, then they come back. And Ukraine needs to scale up that innovation together with first of all capital, because not so much technology but finances and security, where the company will be located inside NATO, can produce these modern day weapons.
But again, you're looking at the modern day weapons and the way Ukraine is stepping up its manufacturing capability. If we look at the old historical expertise militarily there's been in Ukraine, I think if we go back to Soviet days, most of the Soviet missile technology were Ukrainian scientists. Most of the Soviet nuclear technology was provided by Ukrainian scientists. Many of the Soviet aircraft designs were provided by Ukrainian scientists, and many of the tank and armored vehicle designs were provided by Ukrainian scientists and technologists. Ukraine has got that knowledge, that depth of knowledge that's there, and that's something that is possibly missing from parts of Russia at the moment, which is why they're relying on technology transfers from Iran, North Korea, and China. Or am I getting it wrong?
Well, I think we shouldn't underestimate the enemy. Russia also has an school of engineers, and it has military production capabilities, defense industrial base that it can quickly put into use and produce a lot of maybe not so sophisticated, but a lot of deadly weapons. It still kills you, whether it's modern or old fashioned. And that's why we see a lot of these heavy casualties. But what I'm saying, this is not what's going to make the difference in the war. What will make the difference, of course, it's the resilience of economy. It's because it's a war of attrition. So each side needs resources, and we see and hear recent news not so about Russian economy actually experiencing serious resource shortages, and there's infighting now between different companies for orders, for resources. So that weakens the system. Whereas so far, Western assistance to Ukraine has been sustained. There is a talk about putting into use Russian immobilized sovereign assets. And I think people increasingly understand that this is the way forward, not just from the principle or for the not just the income from the principal that is on the account, but the sovereign assets themselves could be confiscated and put into a dedicated escrow account. A lot of them actually matured into cash, so it is much easier. They're liquid, so you can easily move them around, and that should be put to the use of the defense of Europe. We're hearing all these estimates of different intelligences that Russia is preparing to face off NATO. And interestingly, because we also hosted Zelensky last week in Chatham House in between all these important meetings, yes, the conversation was under the Chatham House rules. So protecting the identity of those being at the meeting, there was, for example, a conversation that Russia may scale up its drone attacks against Ukraine to 1,000 a night. So this is a possibility that the war may go into that direction. And that is why Ukraine needs a technological solution to drone immobilization, to fighting this not stone by stone, but it needs a real breakthrough.
Well, unfortunately, the Chatham House rule prevents me from quizzing you on what President Zelensky said. But the one person we've heard very little from since the NATO conference and all the rest of it is Donald Trump and his administration. Um, Over the weekend, the American administration seems to have eased some of its sanctions against Russian banks, but in very specific areas. Do you think Donald Trump's gearing up to either walk away from the Ukrainian war, or do you think he is just biding his time because he's getting very frustrated with Vladimir Putin and we're going to see something else coming out of him?
It's very difficult to decipher this erratic collection of action as a strategy, right? I mean, to be honest, right?
There was me hoping that you could do it for me.
I honestly think that Trump is fundamentally uncomfortable pressuring Putin. Why is this the case? You know, we could speculate. I think also fundamentally he has a similar worldview to the power and authority of big powers. Like we've seen his attack on Iran, for example, the way it was executed, the way it was done. Some people argued outside of international law. So it's clear that Trump is very, very cautious. He understood that he cannot put pressure on Ukraine because it's counterproductive. It actually puts him in bad light, and is not achieving objective. It actually strengthens Ukraine's support for Zelensky domestically. And he is not sure how to deal with Russia. With that bill that is in the Congress on sanction, actually was softened from the original version and allows Trump to apply it when he chooses and when he finds fit. It's not introduced by the Congress, and this was a kind of a solution offered by Lindsey Graham to Trump to say, look, you can pull the trigger anytime you want. You're not losing control of it. I think he very much wants to be himself a driver of this relationship for whatever reason, again, as I said. But so far, we are not seeing any pressure put on Russia. Quite the opposite. Two most recent moves. One was to withdraw United States from the International War Crimes coalition that is investigating, and another one was an order to from the White House to the State Department to stop funding any organization that is gathering war crimes evidence against Russia in the war. So you can see that all of these moves are to please Putin rather than to pressure him.
Okay, Orysia, we're coming close to the end of the time. What's your outlook for the overall conflict within the next year? Do you think you and I are going to be talking about this time next year? Will there be any big changes?
I think definitely the summer campaign will continue on both sides. Russia will try to at least take, they haven't achieved their minimum goal, which is to capture even Donetsk region. They are making a big push in that direction to at least do that. A lot will depend. I mean, things to watch is the stability of Russian economy. Something to watch is whether Trump will indeed introduce those sanctions, hitting hard Russian oil and gas and kind of depriving it from financing the war and introducing secondary sanctions. I mean, Ukraine is not ready to capitulate. It's not an easy fight for Ukraine, but it's adapting, it's finding solutions, and it keeps the defense going. And I think maybe this is the most difficult year where there is this certain realignment of United States, and we're still hopeful that US will back the plan to defeat Russia in Ukraine. And this is what everybody is working towards. But I don't see this war ending definitely but by the end of the year. Don't think so.
On that note, Orysia, that gives me an excuse to invite you back more times, which I would hope we had a position where I didn't have to invite you back, because that would mean there'd be peace. But Orysia, thank you for talking to me today on Frontline. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much, Philip. Good to be with you.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.